Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. There is a building that sleeps in silence now, its windows shattered, its doors chained, its walls sagging with the weight of decades. Yet silence is never what the curious find when they draw near. For in the dead hours of night, whispers leak from its broken rafters. A hymn that should bring comfort instead drags cold dread down the spine. This place once bore the name Saint Aurelia's Orphanage, a house meant to cradle the abandoned and the lost. But those who pass its gates speak of a shadowed figure still pacing the corridors. A nun clad in robes blackened by fire, faceless beneath her scorched veil, clutching rosary beads that clink like chains dragged across stone. Locals recall the blaze that gutted the orphanage decades ago, the fire that ended lives before rescue could arrive. And they say one woman, a nun sworn to watch over the children, did not escape. Her remains were never found among the rubble. Only the charred beads of her rosary fused into the altar stone. Since that night, strange things have unfolded around St. Aurelia's, children's laughter echoing where no child lives, hymns twisting into screams carried on the night air, and for those bold enough to trespass, there comes the sound of rosary beads rattling from the darkness just before the figure emerges, faceless, silent, unyielding, the black nun of St. Aurelia's. For decades, the orphanage remained sealed, its ruins avoided by the living. Yet, as with all forbidden places, there are always those who cannot resist. Teenagers dared one another to slip through the rusted gates. Paranormal seekers brought cameras, recorders, and holy symbols. Even priests stood at the threshold, muttering prayers they would not repeat aloud. Those who entered returned with fractured stories, each one darker than the last. One girl claimed she saw children's handprints appear in the ash along the walls, as though they reached for her from beyond. Another boy staggered home with burns across his arms, though no fire touched him. Investigators left with hours of audio, but when replayed, the recordings warped into hymns sung backward. Between the distorted chants, a woman's voice whispered, "Stay." Some witnesses spoke of the smell of burning flesh, sickly sweet, lingering even after they fled the grounds. Others described a tall figure at the end of the hallway, black robes torn, veil scorched and clinging to her faceless head. She never rushed, never ran. She simply watched, beads of her rosary tapping one by one, louder with each step taken toward the altar. Those who did not turn back claim that, at the final pew, the nun lifted her head, and though her face was a void, they felt her eyes, hollow, endless, and hungry. Each visitor swore that when they left, something followed them home. Nightmares of fire and smoke consumed their sleep. Doors rattled without cause, and always, just before dawn, came the sound of rosary beads tapping in the dark. One winter night, a small group of amateur investigators forced their way inside St. Aurelia's, determined to prove the legends false. They brought with them lanterns, cameras, and the arrogance of those who thought faith and fear were outdated relics. At first, the ruin was only what one might expect: blackened beams, caved ceilings, char-streaked walls. Yet, as the night bled on, their equipment began to fail. Batteries drained, microphones shrieked with static, and the cold grew unbearable. Then came the sound. From the chapel, buried deep within the orphanage, arose the thin, rattling click of rosary beads. Not random, counted, deliberate, each bead sliding beneath invisible fingers. They followed, their breath shaking as the sound grew louder. When they reached the chapel, their lantern light flickered against the altar stone, and there she was. The figure stood unmoving, robes blackened by fire, veil hanging like charred skin. Her faceless head turned slowly toward them, and the rosary in her hand clinked against the floor as though each bead struck a bell of bone. One of the intruders laughed nervously, daring to step closer. His words barely left his lips before the air grew heavy, smoke pouring across the floor though nothing burned. The scent of scorched flesh filled their lungs. And then it happened. The black nun lifted her hand, the rosary wrapping tight around her wrist as if alive. From the walls, shadows burst outward, tall and thin, shaped like children reaching with skeletal hands. The investigators screamed, but their voices were drowned by a deafening hymn, hundreds of voices crying out in agony. One girl collapsed, clawing at her face, shrieking that she could feel the flames. Another swore she saw the nun's veil ripple, revealing a charred jaw lined with teeth that were not her own. Cameras dropped, lanterns shattered, and in the chaos, every intruder swore they heard the same final whisper breathed into their ears from the faceless void before them. "You should have stayed." When the investigators stumbled out into the frozen night, their eyes wide with terror, none dared to look back at the orphanage. What they carried home was worse than the sight of her, the lingering dread that she had followed. One by one, their lives unraveled. Shadows stirred in their bedrooms at night. Rosary beads rattled inside drawers that had never held them. Dreams of fire consumed their sleep, always ending with children screaming for help. And then came the sightings, neighbors, co-workers, even family, who reported seeing a woman in scorched robes standing silently behind them when they thought they were alone. Faceless, motionless, waiting. Some tried to bless their homes, sprinkling holy water, whispering prayers, but the black nun was no longer bound to the orphanage. Her vow had not ended in the fire, it endured, and her flock was growing. The story you just heard is no invention. You can search the ashes of faith and flame, for this haunting is whispered as the Black Nun of St. Aurelia's. Though the orphanage was lost to fire, those who trespass on its grounds still claim her presence lingers. Her rosary, fused into the altar stone, remains a marker, and perhaps a tether. Some say the story inspired local priests to keep the ruins sealed, a forbidden site of prayer turned into a shrine of fear. Others whisper that filmmakers and authors have drawn from her legend, though none dare speak her name directly for fear she will answer. So remember, listeners, faith may protect the living, but vows made in death may bind the spirit forever. Should you hear the rattle of rosary beads in the silence of night, do not follow the sound, for some prayers were never meant to be answered. If you have a horror story of your own, feel free to leave it in the comments. You never know, the next story that comes out of the vault might be yours. Subscribe to the vault and never walk alone again. See you on the next video, and until then, pray your hymns are not answered by screams.